Have you ever gone through an entire day without remembering what you said, who you saw, or even what you thought? Not because something was wrong with your brain, but because your soul had quietly stepped out of the game. I lived like that for an entire year. You could call it living, but in truth, I was only drifting. Like a shadow caught between meaningless heartbeats and rushed meals, I had trained myself not to feel as if emotion itself was a kind of pain I had to avoid. My name is Rowan Hale. I'm 21 years old, a junior biology student living in Northern California, surrounded by forests that people often describe as heaven on earth. But paradise can't save someone who's lost inside themselves. I knew every theory about life, cells, DNA structure, and the circulatory system. I had memorized the photosynthesis process so well that I could dream about it. But no one had ever taught me how to live when waking up in the morning felt like a burden. How to get out of bed when your mind is heavier than your body. How to pretend you're okay when your soul feels like a desert, dry, cracked, and aching for rain. I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to keep going like that. Maybe that's why I started biking into the forest. Not because I loved nature, but because the trees didn't ask me, "Are you okay?" They didn't require me to answer, "I'm fine." Out there, I could finally be quiet without performing. No acting. No pretending that the paper I turned in yesterday meant anything at all. The winding trails through the Redwood forest felt like they led somewhere no one could find, not even me. And so I kept riding, day after day, as if going far enough might make me disappear. People say that the forest is ancient, sacred, even magical. But to me, it was the only place where I didn't have to wear a mask. I used to stand for hours beneath the towering canopy, staring up at the branches intertwined like the fingers of some invisible hand. I didn't know what I was searching for, but something inside me kept whispering, "Keep going, go deeper." And then, one afternoon, I listened. I rode farther than I ever had before, far enough to lose cell signal, far enough that all I could hear was the sound of tires against dirt and wind sifting through dry leaves, far enough that there was no clear way back. That's when everything began. I didn't know that the moment my bike slipped on a small slope that day, it wouldn't just throw me to the ground. It would knock my soul from my body. And in that moment, I didn't see a tunnel of light. I saw real life in a way I had never known before. I don't remember the sound of the impact. There was no dramatic crunch, no scream, no cinematic spray of blood. Just a sudden, silent slip. So quiet I barely realized I had crossed the threshold between physical life and something else. The front wheel lost control. The slope was slick. A thick root jutted from the earth like an invisible hook. I lost my balance and didn't have time to react. The entire fall lasted less than 3 seconds. But to me, time no longer moved the way it used to. It stretched, elongated, as if the universe was asking me to slow down, to truly see what I'd spent my whole life missing. I felt no pain. That was the first thing that scared me. My body was motionless, yet I didn't feel heavy. Instead, I felt like I was floating, as if gravity had simply let go of me. I could see myself lying beneath the trees, my back twisted, arms splayed like a doll dropped on the forest floor. A soft sigh echoed not from my lips, but from somewhere else. A space that felt unfamiliar, yet deeply known. Soft, gentle, without color or form, but more real than anything I had ever experienced. I began to rise, not like an angel with wings, but like a stream of consciousness being lifted by a force that was impossibly tender, impossible to resist. I floated past the treetops I used to only gaze up at. Now I was among them. And then something touched me. Not a hand, but a presence. A current of knowing that didn't use words, yet I understood it completely, as if it were speaking and feeling, something language could never hold. In that moment, I didn't think, "I've died." There was no panic, no regret, only a calm awareness that I was no longer confined by limits. No more body to hurt, to ache, to thirst. But also, no more old me, the version of me that was tired, lonely, and dulled by depression. What I sensed was a deeper version of myself, still, clean, as if layers of life's heavy dust had just been washed away. And that's when I heard the first sound, not from a person, but from the trees. Trees don't speak with mouths, but when you are no longer human, you can hear the forest's voice. And what the 1,000-year-old trees whispered to me changed everything. Have you ever wondered if a tree knows you're there? Not because you touched it, not because it swayed in the wind, but because it felt your soul before your body ever came near. In that moment, I was no longer Rowan Hale with a student ID, a social security number, or a fear of failing finals. I was no one, and yet I was everything. I was the breeze brushing through the branches, the last drop of dew clinging to a newborn leaf, the soundless birdsong that somehow still echoed in the mind. The beam of sunlight pierced through the canopy like golden threads weaving all life together. I was no longer standing before nature. I was nature. The trees began to speak to me, not in words, not in images, but through a deep knowing, one I felt more than heard, as if I had finally remembered something I had once been but forgotten long ago. It was as if an ancient instinct had been awakened inside me. I could feel the roots beneath me not just pulling water from the soil, but holding together a vast network of living energy, a kind of Earth's nervous system where every creature was connected through a wisdom no scientist has yet found a name for. There was a tree nearby, massive, older than anything I had ever seen, like an ancient teacher. It didn't say, "Welcome, child," but I understood it had known me long before I was born. It knew the pain I carried. It knew the nights I collapsed in dark rooms. It knew the fear of entering a life without a clear way out. And it didn't try to comfort me. It simply held me, with a silent, magnificent presence that no human language could ever fully express. And in that stillness, I suddenly understood. I had never been alone. I had only forgotten how to listen. We think only humans have souls, but in that moment, I knew with every part of me, trees remember. They feel. They love. They have watched us rush and destroy and build and cut and take, and still, they choose silence. They choose to stay, like a patient mother watching her angry child break things, waiting with compassion. I began to hear each frequency of emotion, the forgiveness in the leaves, the sacrifice of the roots, the sorrow of a broken branch, the quiet joy of sunlight. There were no words for what I was experiencing because it was no longer a story. It was a rebirth from within the very architecture of my soul. I used to think that if death feels like this, then maybe we've misunderstood it for far too long. There was no punishment, no judgment, no heavy scales weighed down with guilt, only a vast stillness, so deep that all the noise of life felt as small as the hum of a mosquito inside a dream. And I wanted to stay. I wanted to dissolve into that soft light surrounding me, where each breath was no longer a biological need, but a wave of primal awareness. But then it happened. A strange vibration moved through the space, not sound, not form, but I recognized it instantly as a higher will. It felt like some ancient part of the universe had just opened its eyes and was now looking directly into my soul. It didn't scold, it didn't accuse, it didn't threaten. It simply asked. Not with words, but I felt it clearly, like a voice whispering inside my chest. "You've seen, but are you willing to live differently?" I didn't know how to answer. Was I ready? Did I even deserve to come back after abandoning my life for so long? And if I did return, would I remember this, or would it fade like a dream at sunrise? I didn't make the choice, but some part of me, deeper than thought, deeper than fear, chose for me. And that choice began with a memory. A flash like lightning, my mother slicing apples on the balcony. A friend who once sat beside me in silence when I had no words. A neighbor's dog that used to follow me every morning. Small things, tiny fragments I thought had been buried beneath the ruins of depression. And that's when I realized, it's the small things that tether us to life. Not the big dreams, not the shining accomplishments, but the moments are soft as grass, light as air, so real they can almost be called a reason to stay. You know, I used to believe that if there was a force beyond this life, it had to be grand, overwhelming, bathed in golden light, maybe even wrapped in some divine halo. But it wasn't. What called me back wasn't some celestial choir. It wasn't a booming, authoritative voice. It was a quiet touch from memory, like a drop of water on the face of someone fast asleep, like the sound of a single leaf falling in the night, like a calling that had no words, but you know it's meant for you. I felt like a lost child, looking up and seeing a small light at the edge of the forest, not big, not loud, but home. And in that moment, Home wasn't my apartment in Northern California. It wasn't my university. It wasn't even the body lying motionless beneath the tree. Home was the realization that I wanted to return. Not because I had to, but because something remembered me. Do you know that feeling? That somewhere in this vast world, something is still waiting for you, even after you've left in silence, too hopeless to say goodbye? The trees didn't cry, but I felt the forest's quiet sorrow, not because I was leaving, but because it knew that once I returned to the human world, I might forget what I'd heard. But this time, I made a silent promise. I won't forget. I didn't know what shape I'd wake up in. I didn't know if my body would still move or even breathe. But I knew one thing more certain than any science I had ever studied. I wasn't returning to continue the life I had. I was returning to live for real. And the moment I thought that, it was like a gate opened, not out there, but here. A gentle stream of light, almost like the longing of the earth itself, wrapped around my soul and slowly began pulling me back toward the body cooling at the base of the tree. And in that exact moment, I heard something, not from outside, but etched directly into my awareness. You have seen, now live, so you remember. I thought I was being called by heaven, but no, I was called by the earth itself, by everything I had once rejected. And even now, I don't know when I open my eyes again, will I still be the same? I opened my eyes. There was no celestial music, no choir of angels, no divine light pouring from the heavens. Just the old trees, still standing there, silent, proud, as if nothing had happened. A single ray of sunlight slipped through the leaves and touched my face. And I began to cry. Not because I was in pain, not because I had survived, but because I was still here, on this earth, in this body, with a second chance I never thought I deserved. But it came not because I begged for it, but because I was ready to understand. My body was weak, aching, my hip throbbed, my arm was scraped, my head was spinning. As I tried to sit up, it felt like my soul was being stuffed back into an old outfit that no longer fit. Everything felt both familiar and foreign, like returning to a childhood room, finding it smaller and dustier than I remembered, yet still scented with memories. I don't recall how I made it home. Was someone there? Was I taken to the hospital? That part is hazy, like early morning fog. But one thing I remember with perfect clarity. The silence inside me was no longer an emptiness. It was a sacred space, ready to be filled with something holy. In the days that followed, everything began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like roots growing quietly beneath the earth. My senses deepened in ways I couldn't explain. I could hear the sadness in my mother's eyes, even when she said nothing. I could feel the exhaustion of a stranger simply from the way their fingers brushed the counter at the store. I watched the tree outside my balcony tilt slightly each morning, as if bowing to me with an ancient ritual humans had long forgotten. No one taught me this, but I call it molecular empathy, a kind of feeling that happens at the smallest, most invisible level of our being. No explanations, no words, just presence, just listening. And in that space, I knew when someone was hiding a wound. I knew when a leaf was about to fall. I knew when a cat needed to be touched without ever lifting my hand. You might think I'm imagining things, but I'm not. Once you've dissolved into nature, you can never go back to being ordinary. You begin to see light where others see darkness. You see souls in things no one believes are alive. You're no longer lonely, not because someone is beside you, but because every living thing around you is whispering, "I'm here." And then I understood. I wasn't just brought back to life. I was loaned another chance at it, to learn how to live for others. Not to live instead of them, but to live as a mirror, quietly reflecting, did you truly see that flower today, or did you just pass it by? You know what's the hardest part after a near-death experience? It's not healing your body. It's not trying to explain to people how you left your body or heard the forest speak. It's learning how to live again in a world that has never known silence. I'm not enlightened. I'm not a spiritual teacher. There's no halo above my head. I still go back to class. I still pay rent. I still wait in line at the grocery store.
But one thing is different. I can no longer look away from anything. I feel every wave of emotion that people try to hide. A friend may laugh and act like everything's fine, but I can sense a small crack inside them, quietly leaking like an underground spring. I'm not reading minds. I don't know everything. I just feel. And it's exhausting, deeply. Because when you open your heart wide enough to feel life itself, you also have to be strong enough not to drown in all that pain. Sometimes I wish I could close it off, go back to the old shell, be normal again. But I can't. Because once you've heard the sound of the wind brushing against a falling leaf, you can't go back to a life where trees are just scenery in your story.
I began to live slowly. Not the Instagram kind of slow living with tea and books, but truly slow. In every touch, every glance, every breath. I spoke less, but when I did, people listened. Not because I was eloquent, but because my words carried something from the forest, a trace of what I brought back with me from that near-death moment. I walked more, without headphones. I started placing my hand on trees as I passed them, whispering thanks. I stopped eating anything without first asking, what kind of life did this once have? Not out of some moral code, but because I understood now everything that enters the body is a meeting, a communion. And the moment that brought tears to my eyes was when a child looked at me and said, "You don't seem like a grown-up." I asked why. He said, "Because you look at trees like they're talking." I didn't say anything, but in my heart I whispered to the tree nearby, "Thank you. They're starting to feel you, through me." I thought I was given an experience, but now I see I was given a responsibility. And that responsibility began with a question. If you could hear the whispers of the earth and sky, what would you do with the rest of your life? I didn't become a prophet. I didn't open a healing center or teach metaphysics. I'm just Rowan, living in a small room, surrounded by a few potted plants near the window and an old bike with a scratched-up frame. But there's one thing I carry like a memory etched into my DNA. Connection. Not the kind of connection that comes from social media or finding a kindred spirit. I'm talking about the invisible thread between me and every living thing around me. From a tiny bug resting on my desk to the ancient pine tree behind the house. From a passing stranger's eyes to the trembling voice of an elderly man at the post office. I can feel them. Not in the sense that I know who they are, but in the deeper sense, I know when someone needs to be seen. And I've come to realize this world doesn't lack love. It just lacks people who are quiet enough to feel it. I started telling my story not to get attention, but to remind people, especially those who've ever felt disconnected, that they've never truly left the embrace of life. We think we've been abandoned, but really, we've just forgotten how to name the sacredness of small things. Have you ever apologized after absent-mindedly picking a leaf? Have you ever felt gratitude while drinking a sip of cold water? Have you ever paused when the wind brushed against your skin and resisted the urge to immediately think, "Ugh, it's cold"? If the answer is no, it's okay. I used to be that way too, until I died and came back. In every talk I give, I tend to repeat one phrase. I didn't see heaven, but I was immersed in the heart of the earth. And that heart doesn't beat to the rhythm of power or glory. It beats on the frequency of forgiveness, of compassion, of a love that asks for nothing and explains nothing. Now, each morning when I open my eyes, I whisper one simple thing. Thank you for letting me still be here. Thank you for giving me the chance to listen. And if someone were to ask me, "Do you believe trees can think?" I wouldn't respond with an argument. I'd simply smile, turn toward the oak tree behind my house, and quietly nod. When you begin to hear the whisper of the trees, don't ask, "Is this real?" Ask instead, "Have I been silent enough to hear?" We don't have to die to hear that calling. But if you've ever felt lost in the middle of life, try walking into a forest not to find answers, but to allow yourself to remember. You are part of life. You have never been separate from it.